welcome to another edition of From the Stands. On today's episode, we are humbled and thrilled to be able to talk to the founder of Special Olympics, Dr. Frank Hayden. Dr. Frank, how are you today?
I'm doing fine, and you look good too, Ryan.
Thank you. I'm trying. It's an interesting time for sure, obviously without sports, but I've been busy trying to stay fit to a degree, and
to be able to talk to the founder of Special Olympics.
Sorry, there we go. It's been a hectic time for sure as well.
Yeah. It gets a little boring after a while when life changes this way, but don't worry, it's coming back.
Oh, for sure. How are you and Marion doing?
We're doing okay. We're fine, and we try to get out for exercise now and then, and try to stay fit. And we have some medical assistants about the things, and we visit them. And we have family in the area. Well, you may know Scott worked at Special Olympics Ontario off and on. Yep. And he's working in personal training now, doing well with it. And so we see them, and they try to make sure our life is not too boring.
That's great. So let's hop right into it. So my first question for you is, where did the passion come for you from wanting to help support individuals with an intellectual disability?
Well, it's funny the way things happen. I was down at the University of Illinois. I went to Western originally. I went down to Illinois for my master's degree, worked for the Air Force, and then somebody told me, no, you should go back there and get the doctorate because it's like a union card for universities to get a job. So we all went down there for, about 4 or 5 years. And wondering how to get back into Canada for a job, and something showed up at the University of Toronto, and a wonderful man named Dr. Harry Ebbs, who was also chief of pediatrics at the Sick Kids. I went up and interviewed with him for a job on the faculty at Toronto, and fortunately got it. We all came back to Toronto, and he called me while I was still down there and said, I have a chance for a grant that'll pay half your salary if you're willing to do some work and research with children with mental handicap. And I said, well, I'll call you back in 2 days and let you know. I have a full minor in psychology in my doctoral program, but I didn't have anything in that area at this time. And so I went to the library and read up, and at the end of 2 days, I called them back and said, fine, I'll do it. Because the chief reason was that there was hardly anything published back then. And then I went down to the Beverly School in downtown Toronto. And frankly, what really turned me on and got me going were the students there, and the teachers there, and the staff, and what they were doing. And people had no idea. There were about 350 kids there. And it was a terrific experience. I look forward to going there every day. There were 2 young people that were running the phys ed program there, and Doreen Crystal and Harold Smith, and doing a terrific job without a lot of training to do it. So I loved that, and I stayed with it, and just because of what I found out there and how unfit they were, and what the programs we put in and so on, how fit they could be if they had more activity. And I said to myself eventually, I said, the way to do that is through sport. That's the way that'll keep them interested, that'll get them fit, and they're ready for it. They're ready to go. So Special Olympics is really, in a lot of ways, it's the application of what we were doing at Beverly School, of course, with a lot of twists and turns and additions of various people over the years. But the Beverly School is really where the thought started.
And that's fantastic because, as we know, Special Olympics is such a huge movement of inclusion today. And truly, like, your work has launched into a, like, I don't even know how words can describe it. There's so many ways that your work has benefited thousands and thousands and thousands of athletes across Canada, the US, the world, and everything as well. And for that, I'm going to say it probably a few times during this chat, but thank you so much for your work, because I know for me personally, as I mentioned, and as you're aware, I'm an athlete with Special Olympics as well, and I wouldn't be here today without the work that you provided early on as well. Now, during...
Well, that's nice of you to say that, and I like to hear it. But frankly, I've got at least as much out of Special Olympics as any athlete in the world. And big part, and my whole family as well. So, and we still are here. We are still doing things, and it's been a very big part of my life. And I'm glad I made the decisions I made along the way.
And out of those decisions and out of the Special Olympics sports that we now have, there's 18 sports that Special Olympics Canada provides to athletes, again, across Canada. Which out of those sports would you have to say is your favorite?
My favorite? Well, I liked them all. You know, another reason I got into this was my own background. You know, I was never an Olympic athlete, but through high school, I played football, basketball, track, lacrosse, baseball. I went to university, I wrestled. And so sport was such a big part of my life. So I knew if we brought that into the life of anybody, what it could do for them, not just physically, that of course, and health-wise, but what it does for your life and the friends you make and the things you look forward to and the goals you have, and working with your teammates. And so that was a big part of it too. In some ways, I was trying to bring my life, but actually into theirs. But as it turned out, Special Olympics gave them a lot more than even I had along the way. And so I grew up in St. Catharines, and just because of my great involvement of sport is why I went into phys ed at Western and then down to Illinois. So sport has played a big part in my life the same way. And for Marion and I here, the biggest reward for us now is when we go to events like you're talking about, talk to athletes, but more talk to parents and family members, and say, who say to us, boy, you don't know what this has brought into our life. It's not quite the same way as it was at the beginning because it was brand new to them. And I didn't know what was going to happen when we were going to do that. But I had confidence, again, because of the Beverly School. I saw how they reacted and what fun we had together. And they had no objection to running and training and working hard. And we all had great fun at it. And I thought, the way to express this is really through sport.
Definitely. Now, as we all know, Special Olympics has made such a remarkable impact worldwide with programs in over 193 countries. What are your thoughts on something that began, like you touched on it a little bit earlier in our conversation, but what are your thoughts on something that began from your research has now become a global movement?
I'm sorry, I don't quite get the question.
Sorry, what are your thoughts on, we see how big of a movement Special Olympics is all over the world now, and it all began with your research. how does the feeling for you, like what's your feelings towards knowing that something that you started has made that big of an impact across the globe?
Well, the first thing I think about it very selfishly is, and I think what a wonderful thing it's done for me. Of those 193 countries, I've probably visited almost half of them one way or another, and many that I haven't. I was with them there at the beginning to help them get started. The thing too, as far as the worldwide thing is concerned, it really opened my eyes that that we're all the same in this world. When I went to Africa, or I went to Australia, or went to China, these places, the people I work with and the athletes we work with, they weren't any different than I had at the Beverly School or that you guys are here. And so excited and interested in sport too, which is a worldwide thing. And we, especially these days with some problems, people think we're that different because our skin color is different, or our religion, or our background, or where in the world we come from. Well, we're much more alike than we are different. And we see that all the time in Special Olympics.
For sure. It's definitely, yeah, because like you're right on the head, like nail on the head with that. Like there's so many different ability levels with Special Olympics, and the message and the power of inclusion within the movement is so important, and that you're right, like we are all alike, and there isn't a difference between us because we're just as good as the next person to be able to play sports, and that truly shows with the programs that we have in place as well.
Yeah, like winning is, it makes it more fun, I guess. But like in all sport, the thing is to perform the best you can on a given day, and be happy with your performance. After that, what everybody else does is up to them. But be happy with what you do. Like sometimes, even if you win, you might not be all that happy with you perform because you could have done better even at that. But you're really competing against yourself and the goals that you've set for yourself, and so you can feel good about yourself when it's over. That's a big part of it.
Now, out of all of the programs through the 193 countries that Special Olympics has, which country is your favorite outside of Canada to see programming in or competing in?
Well, it's good that you took Canada out of it because yeah, I have some bias that way. It was funny with Canada, by the way, that when I first started in the United States, actually, I was going to do it up here. I had a proposal that the Centennial Commission in Ottawa had pretty well said they would fund the whole thing, not just the games. I said 2 years of training and building an organization leading up to the games, and we would have been left with it after 1967, Canada's centennial year. And there was a lot of money in Ottawa to do things like that. They were really happy when they looked at the proposal, and they mentioned, we like things like a birthday party, and people participate. And he said, what you've got, the range of people and the roles and things that will be required to make it happen, means that everybody will be a part of this, and not just the athletes. So, but through a series of circumstances, I ended up going down to the United States to the Kennedy Foundation and doing it there. The first games were in '68. I think I actually went down there about the first time about 1961 for a year, and then came back. I was at Western by then, and took a year off. just to try it down there and see. And I thought, what I found out was, yeah, it had the potential, couldn't do a lot in that regard in 1 year. But, and every time I gave a presentation anywhere in the States and in Washington, or people came in to visit, I always pumped this idea with them. I don't know what I was calling it then, not Special Olympics. Put that term on once we had games established in the first games in Chicago, and decided to give it that name. And to be honest with you, the name came from, well, first of all, Olympics, obviously, to give an idea of what it was that we were after. I was always a big fan of the Olympics or the games, certainly as they were back then. And then special, just because that's what everybody was using: special education, special needs, special programs, etc. What we put special on it, people will know what we're talking about. And but when I think about how it grew, whether it's state to state or country to country, my first thought is people. And I see the man, I see the woman, or the girl, or the boy. And, you know, it got established well here in Canada as well because of some very special people that were committed to it. And frankly, it wasn't that hard to sell. It was so hard here in Canada to get them to take on the commitment and the challenge of a national organization and of having regularly scheduled games and doing that. Initially, here in Canada, Special Olympics was really just the national games that happened now and then, not on any regular schedule, but just people were told across the country, fly some kids into Toronto next August or whatever for games. And it took a while to convince the powers that be that it needed an organization of its own. And actually, the pressure came a lot from the West, as a lot of things do in Canada between East and West, that they wanted to be part of the action. They didn't want to just get a call to say, bring kids and do what you do. But they said they wanted to be part of the operation, have a say in it, have some input, and do it in a shared way, and got their word heard. And that, and so it took, I think, at least 7 or 8 years from the first games in Toronto in '69 before there was really a Special Olympics Canada organization. But it's sort of related to what I was talking about, that people aren't that different around the world. I just, you know, my favorite memories really have to do with the people, you know, and things that happen. And so many of them, you know, we are what we are today, and the experiences you and all your fellow athletes have is because of those people. And that's true of everything in life. If you want to do something or accomplish, you know, it's people that will help you. And once you find them and you establish your relationship, you know, try to hold on to that. You know, I tell you, for like an example, when they talk about the history, one of the first countries that pops into my mind is New Zealand. I had established an office for international development and put myself as director. I got leave from McMaster. I was at McMaster by that time. And I established an office in Washington for international development, and I spent about a third of my time there and maybe 2/3 traveling the world. And I still had an office at MAC. But before the games in 1983, which were done in Baton Rouge, Louisiana State University, terrific sports school, marvelous facilities and sport-oriented people. It was a great place for us to go. And so this is 1983, and along about early that year, January, I think, I got a call at my office in Washington by a fellow, and he says, hello, he says, my name is Grant Quinn. And he says, I'm in Christchurch, New Zealand, and I'm a swimming coach. That's what I do. And at my club that I operate, I have some kids from special education classes and so on that swim with us. And I heard about those games you're having this year. And he says, I want to send a team. He says, because some of them swim well enough that they'll do well there. And I said, well, I'm sorry, but you can't just jump on the plane and come over here. I said, you have no organization, no program, no training for this that I know of. You've never run a competition to select them. I said, you have to accomplish and build something before. Initially, we took everybody that came, but now you really have to have something in place. Well, he debated with me for quite a while, and eventually we said goodbye. And about a week later, I got another call from him, and he went through the whole thing again, and I tried to explain. Another 2 weeks, he calls me again. He called me about 4 or 5 times in 2 months, still pleading his case. And eventually I said to myself, you know, Frank, this guy will probably do it. He's so committed and so determined of making these calls. So next time he called, I said, okay, you can bring, I think it was 4 or 6 swimmers and 2 coaches with them. But I said, there's just one obligation you have. If I say you can come, when you go back, you have to take the responsibility to establish Special Olympics New Zealand, the national program. Without a beat passing, he said, you're on. And after the games, they came to the games. It's funny, that group that came, I remember they went to an ice cream shop. They were off for the afternoon, weren't competing. They go into an ice cream shop in downtown Baton Rouge, and several of them were very social, loved to chat with everybody. And one of the athletes went up to the young man behind the counter, and he says, hi, he says, my name's Jim. Who are you? And the guy says, well, I'm Bill. And he says, well, Bill, he says, I'm Jim, and I'm from New Zealand, and I came here to swim. He says, and I'm competing tomorrow afternoon, and you should be there to see me. And the guy behind the counter says, well, I'm sorry. He says, Bill, I can't come, but he says, I have to work. And Bill says, really? He says, where's the boss? and he's at the back of the store. So Billy goes to the back of the store, and he says, hi, I'm Billy, and I'm from New Zealand, and I'm swimming tomorrow, and your employee up there wants to come and see me, but he says you won't let him. Without going through the whole story, what happened in the end, the next day when he swam, that young man behind the counter was there to cheer him. So was the boss that ran the place, and 2 other staff people from there. He had his whole cheering section to help him. When they went back to New Zealand, and they came and they looked fantastic. They were dressed just like New Zealand Olympic team, with the blazers with the silver leaf on here and the gray slacks. And they had traveling uniforms, competing uniforms, and they really did it up well. And when they got back home, Grant Quinn called me and said, are you going to help me if I do this now? I said, I said, sure, I'll be there. I ended up going there about 4 times. And when I went the first time, we traveled over the length and breadth of New Zealand. And he had things set up for me to give demonstrations with athletes or give a talk to a club or whatever to tell people what was going on. And so I saw all of New Zealand. It was terrific. What they could do down there, at least in those days, he would walk me into a newspaper office and introduce me and tell them why I was there and whatnot, and that they needed to get somebody to interview me, and somebody would come out and do it, and it'd be in the paper the next day. Or we go to a television show, and whoever did the drive home show would be on, and they take me in there, and all of this just off the spur of the moment, walking in. It's pretty informal country down there in New Zealand.
Yeah.
So, and then he took his teams and me. We all went to the Parliament, New Zealand Parliament, and there was a wonderful reception in the lobby with the Prime Minister and all of the Parliament members as well. And a lot of the athletes spoke about their experiences and what they were doing now. And of course, they were all dressed in their travel uniforms. And it's a wonderful story of how it happens, as they start from, not exactly from zero, in that he had a swim club, but that there was somebody like Grant Quinn who was ready and prepared to do that. And in the end, as things went along, Grant, as the program grew in New Zealand, I say we're down there several times, and I tried to did set up the international program on regional basis, and one being the Asia Pacific region, big region to cover, and try to get somebody responsible for it. And Grant became the director for the Asia Pacific area and helped people that way. So it's funny how it starts, for me telling him no, and all of a sudden he's affecting things not only across New Zealand, but across the whole Asia Pacific area.
Yeah, it's insane how small the community really is. And also, too, I have to say, you remembering people's names is fantastic, because I am the kind of guy that recognizes a face like 9 times out of 10. Will I remember their name? 2 times out of 10. So the fact that you know stories like that is just remarkable. Like that's incredible that like someone reached out to you like that, and now here we are within a program in New Zealand. Now,
Yeah.
when
Well, I'll tell you, right, it
Yeah.
gets harder as time goes on to remember names, especially. But because of the things you do with them, you remember the names.
Definitely, it's
like
all about the memories.
Always remember Grant just because of what he did and went together and what came out of it. And one of the inspiring stories from Europe, actually, there's a guy named Bernard Jourdan, and he ran a residential complex, really interesting place in outside of Brussels in Belgium. And he heard about Special Olympics, and he was really a goal-getter, and he was major move as far as Europe was concerned. And but the other country and the people I remember are from Ireland. Ireland, they really got into the program, and they had some things going there before through their school in terms of sport and physical activity, and the young lady running the gymnastics program and phys ed and whatnot there was named Mary Davis, and I worked with her and other people in Ireland. My dad was from Ireland, so I had a special interest in that. she was terrific. And as were the whole crew that she brought together in Ireland. It was great. And they influenced not just Ireland, but Europe. And then at one point later, I lived over in Europe, in Paris, to get an office established for European Special Olympics. And eventually she succeeded me there. She became the director of Special Olympics Ireland. She moved in there to become director of Special Olympics Europe. And now today, she's the executive director of Special Olympics International. She's come all that way. And I'll tell you, they couldn't have appointed a better person and somebody that knows it from top to bottom. They know the athletes and the coaches and what has to happen. And she spends part of her time in Washington, where she has an office there, and part of her time back in Dublin. But it's because of people like Mary Davis that we are what we are today. And I always think that one of the best moves they ever made was her appointment down in Washington, for sure.
Yeah, I haven't had the pleasure of meeting Mary yet. I've been on I've seen her on obviously some videos with athletes and things like that. But you're right, it's very important in an organization, especially this substantial, to have someone that has that knowledge, that has that background, to be able to know top to bottom, or bottom to top rather, what needs to go into programming to keep the success of it going, for sure.
Exactly.
Now, when we talk about health, what do you think is the main barrier for health for people with intellectual disabilities today?
I think we still have some leftovers from the past. We've gone about capabilities. You know, when we first started, when you talked about putting people with intellectual disabilities even in a race, run down the track, a lot of people looked, and it was a contradiction between the two things. You know, that's not what they would do. Now, a big part of what we had to do was overcome that and show that the capabilities were indeed there, and to show that the motivation and the interest and the goal setting and everything would work with them too. So we've overcome a lot of that, but not all of it. You know, there's still, if you talk about people with disabilities, and people don't think about that in sport in the same breath. My viewpoint from the beginning was that what I really had to do was present this as sport to get all the benefits that we're talking about. I mean, everybody should have some recreation in their life and play and whatnot at certain times. And that's good. But what we're talking about is like the fourth dimension of activity. It's sport. And people might look at kids playing on a playground, but you wouldn't think of that as sport. And little by little, we did get that kind of recognition, and they established their relationships with sporting organizations in the countries, as we have here. I'll say that we only are able to use the word Olympics with the agreement from the Canadian Olympic Committee. And that's the same in all the countries of the world that are required to get agreement that they own that word. And Olympiad, Citius, Aldius, Fortius, all those things. And it got sticky in some countries where they're very traditional with the Olympics, but I'll tell you, in Canada, not at all. Here, immediately they said, sure, and what can we help you? And the Canadian Olympic Committee was a big part of our success. But as I say, it would really help if people saw us as sport, not as just play or something casual, to do it seriously. So it was important to do that for the athletes to get everything out of it they should get out of it, but also for us to get accepted as well. So from the beginning, I was thinking that way. I've forgotten when it was, to tell you the truth, but about 3 or 4 years ago, I think the Canadian Sport Hall of Fame decided to put me in it. And my first thought was, obviously that's good for me and whatnot, but my first thought was, we've made it. If they think that I can go in there for what I did in Special Olympics, that shows they accept us as sport in the Canadian Sport Hall of Fame. And of course, later on, just last year, we had a wonderful power lifter from out Newfoundland. And I had said when that happened, everybody said, geez, isn't that great? And I said, well, when we really made it will be when they appoint an athlete in there. I'm in as a builder. But if they look at the performances and the careers and do that and recognize that by our athletes, that means that we really have acceptance. And that happened just last year with a wonderful power lifter from
Jackie there.
Jackie, he's won gold medals at World Games and holds all the records for powerlifting and Special Olympics, but he also was conquering non-handicapped people in generic powerlifting as well. And it's unfortunate that the COVID virus happened to come along and follow this up like everything else. And so he didn't get inducted this year, but he will next year. And we'll all have a big celebration in Toronto because they always do the inductions there. And then we have a big dinner and a party. And he has really made history that way. And I know enough of you guys and seen what you do that he's only the first. There will be others in there for sure.
For sure. And talking about meeting other athletes, you touched on meeting parents and other volunteers and watching games. This is going to be probably your most difficult question I'm going to throw at you. But what has been your favorite memory throughout Special Olympics for the entirety of the program?
Oh, gee, there's so many great memories. I have trouble picking out one. I think of things I think about at the very first games in Chicago in 1968. We stayed at the LaSalle Hotel, and we had, at the Kennedy Foundation, we had used that hotel for another event that we had in Chicago. So I went back there, and then about a week before the games, when people were, the folks at the Park District in Chicago called me and said, well, we thought we should let you know, but we're having a little trouble with the fundraising. We don't know if we'll be able to cover it all. And I said, well, that's great. You wait till a week before and you tell me you've got trouble covering the hotel bill. And I said, what would help? And they said, well, if we could get one of the meals at the hotel covered, that would really be helpful. I mean, that's that year, that would have been a dinner for almost 2,000 people between the athletes and the coaches and the celebrities and whatnot. And I said, well, leave it with me. And then I found out that that hotel, the LaSalle, was owned by the president of the International Olympic Organization, the IOC, Avery Brundage. He was also known as a very, very tough guy and had his way, and he was into all kinds of stuff on an international scene. I thought, well, it's worth a try anyway. So I wrote him a letter and said, well, thought he'd be interested because of his concern with youth and sport, etc., to hear about what we were doing in Chicago. And I said, and incidentally, we're staying at your hotel, so I want to invite you to the games, and you could speak at the opening ceremonies and help us out. We'd be honored if you would come. And then I said, oh, and by the way, they're having a little trouble handling the fundraising. If you could, if the hotel could cover one of the dinners, it would really help. But if you can't, I understand. Sort of threw that in at the end. When I came to Chicago to settle in early in the week, and on the Monday, I guess, the manager of the hotel, who I had a good relationship with at that point, he came steaming across the lobby, and he had my letter in his hand. He says, you wrote this letter to the old man? And I said, well, yeah, I just thought he'd like to know. And he says, you're asking for dinner. He says, he can't give you a dinner. I said, well, if he can't, he can't. You know, but I thought it was okay to ask. He said, if he thinks I put you up to this, he says, I'll lose my job. I said, no, it's just between me and him. And so when I got to the hotel, they told me he was away. He would be back the next day. Next day, I got a call to go up to his office. And they kept me sitting there waiting in the corner for about half an hour, and eventually let me in. And he didn't even look up at me. And he said, you want a dinner? And I said, well, yes, Mr. Brundage, if you could. And he said, the hotel can't give you a dinner. I said, well, I understand, but I just thought I should. But the Brundage Foundation can. So I didn't know he had his own private foundation as well. And he was prepared to cover that with funds from his foundation. And so I'm thinking, I thought, well, Frank, you got your dinner. Get out of here now. And as I'm backing up, he says, by the way, he says, who the hell told you you could use the name Olympic? And I said, well, I did write to the U.S. Olympic Committee. He said, what'd they say? And I sort of grinned. I said, never answered. And he said, typical, and so on. No, he didn't even come to the games. But before I got down to my suite and office, there was a call from a gal on the phone for me. She's waiting. And I said, yeah, I'm so-and-so. And she says, I'm the public relations director for the hotel. I just had a call from Mr. Brundage. He's talking about a dinner, and he wants balloons, and he wants music, and he wants flags and everything. And she says, I'm just one person. So even Avery Brundage, the toughest guy in the Olympic movement, you know, bought it and covered us there. And I, that, you know, in answer to the question of memories I have of things happening, that was a big one. And also it meant in some ways that we were, again, accepted as sport.
Definitely. And that's also a huge stepping stone for sure. And that's one heck of a memory because Again, it's very important about who you talk to and who you meet. And the way that I approach things, even when I do fundraisers at a local level, what the worst case is they're going to say no. You just got to put the ask out, and you never know what you're going to come back with, right?
Yeah, that's right. One other thing I'll tell you is that big memories and wonderful ones that I have internationally are from Hong Kong. And I really think of those a lot when I hear about the problems in Hong Kong these days, and the troubles they're having and demonstrations and whatnot. Hong Kong had some things going in sport there before I came along, but then I visited them 4 or 5 times, and we did demonstrations with athletes and so on. And there was a wonderful man there heading that up, and Dickon Young. And he stayed with the movement. He was involved in a lot of things in Hong Kong, eventually moved over to the States. But he was a terrific guy, and it was really, he played a major role too in developing the Asia Pacific area, because we hosted regional conferences and demonstrations in Hong Kong, and he had wonderful people there. And then I said to him eventually, I said, Dickon, when are we going to get into mainland China, the Republic? And he says, well, it will happen, Frank. I knew he had contacts over there, and he knew how to talk to them over there. And I said, Dickon, they have over 1 billion people in that country. What a market, we've got to get in there. And he says, just be patient, be patient. But I knew he went in there frequently, and he was working at it. And then finally he called me. I was back at my office at Mac, I guess, then. And he said, Frank, they're ready. I said, really? He says, what are they going to do? And he says, they want to have a training conference. They want to take 2 people from each of 12 regions that covers all of China, and 2 translators. And they want you to come over and train them for a week or 10 days. Are you willing to do it? I said, I'll get on the plane tomorrow. I said, where are we going to do it? And he said, well, they asked the people in China, what do they want to do it? Do you want Hayden to come into China, or would you like to go to Hong Kong? And we have it there. Well, of course, that wasn't a choice. In those days, you needed a special permit and an application, everything, just to get out of town. And to go to a place like Hong Kong for them would be wonderful. So they came. We had a wonderful week or 10 days. They're all terrific people, great variety, men and women, different kinds of jobs. And the first day I saw them one evening, we had a reception in the sports center. And one of the translators come out to me, he said, excuse me, sir, but the delegates say they want to know if you have any questions to ask them. And I said, well, I just have one. And she said, well, what's that? And I said, I'd like them to tell me why they think they're here. You don't know what you're getting and how much influence the government had on who got sent there and what their attitudes and backgrounds were, or how much they were told about Special Olympics. So she translated for the one of the leaders, and he looked really puzzled, and he talked to a couple of other guys, and they looked puzzled, and they buzzed among themselves, and eventually the guy turned and he said to her in Chinese, he says, that question is very easy to answer. I said, yeah, what's the answer? He says, you're going to tell us what to do, and we're going to go back and do it. I couldn't get a better answer than that. If I went to Europe, I'd tell them what to do, and they give me 5 ways that are better, But I said, terrific, and we did have that terrific meet. When I came back, Dickin called me to let me know that they went back to their regions, which covered all of China, and within a year they had had large-scale games at all 12 regions. And then he called me again. He says, Frank, he says, I've had a call again from the folks in China. He says, they're going to run national games now. And that only took them just over a year to get that far. And I said, oh, that's terrific. He says, but they called me and they wondered if you'd come over for their games. And I said, nothing would make me happier. And I went over, and the games were very well done. And it's nice to see my old friends, to reunite with them. It's so different from what, the Hong Kong situation right now, for example, or the image that some people have of China and Chinese. And they're wonderful. I went over and had tea with them in the dormitories in the evening. And one thing, you'll appreciate this one. I was talking to somebody out on the field, and the translator came up and said, sir, one of the coaches would like to talk to you. I said, fine. He came and she translated. He wanted to know if I'd go over and watch his athlete. I said, sure, where is it? So we go over, and he's a long jumper. Young man, 18 years, maybe 19. And the coach signals him. He runs down the runway for the long jump, the running long jump, and going like crazy. He hits a takeoff board and he sails through the air, and with a fantastic jump. And I said, God, that's fantastic. I congratulated the coach. I said, you've done a fantastic job with him. And he's a wonderful jumper. And he grinned and he looked at me and he said, remember you told us first stage, second stage, third stage training? And I says, oh yeah. He says, it works.
That's fantastic.
I know it works. That's why I told you.
Well, hey, next time I need some more training, maybe I'll give you a ring up and get you to come out and show me some moves as well. Really
yeah,
quickly
I don't know how physically active I'll be, but I'll be there.
Now, really quickly before we wrap up, my last question for you is, for those that are watching that are Special Olympic athletes, do you have any words or any kind of words of wisdom you would like to share with those athletes that are watching really quick?
Well, I want you to know how much, not just me, but so many people, when they see you compete and see what you do, they have great admiration for you. It's not what they thought they were going to see. And many people, when they see that, they become involved. When we first started Special Olympics, it was pretty well all volunteer. It isn't now, as you know, because there's a sorry. Hello. Yeah, we'll be done in about 5 minutes. Okay. Sorry about that. That's a lunch call. But
No
but get everything out of it. When you compete for yourself and to perform the very best you can, and get to see the whole sport picture, what's in there for you, not just the run the race and take 2 seconds off your time, but the relationship with your athletes, the friends you make. One thing I really regret is that it hasn't been possible for me to keep contact with all the wonderful people and friendships I made even around the world. And I think, wouldn't it be nice to see them all in one place? But it's not possible. But do what you can, because those good teammates that you have can be friends for life. And that's something Special Olympics can do for you as well.
Definitely. And you know what? We know you have so many more stories that we want to have you share, and we had some questions come in as well that we weren't able to get to, but we will make sure that we will feature them next time, or do something like this again soon. So Dr. Frank, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today, to share your stories, your memories, and be part of the show today. We really appreciate it. And again, on behalf of myself, all of my fellow athletes, coaches, volunteers, and everyone within the Special Olympics movement, thank you so much again for everything that you've done for us to make Special Olympics what it is today. And yeah, just thank you so much.
Thank you. And we'll see you at the games.
Yes, for sure.
Wherever it is.
Thanks again.
Okay,
so much.
thank you for including me. Really enjoyed it.
No problem. We'll talk again.